To the countless nameless servants of the Middle Ages, whose tireless efforts sustained the glittering facade of castles and manor houses, whose lives, though often harsh and unrecorded, were nonetheless integral to the fabric of their time. This book is a small attempt to illuminate the shadows of history, to give voice to the voiceless, and to acknowledge the grit, resilience, and surprising humor that infused their daily existence. It is dedicated to those who toiled in the kitchens, scrubbed the floors, tended the stables, and bore the weight of silence, their contributions often overlooked yet essential to the functioning of medieval society. Their stories, though fragmented and scattered, resonate through the ages, whispering of a world far removed from the romanticized images often presented. This dedication serves as a silent nod of appreciation for their often forgotten strength, their enduring perseverance in the face of hardship, and their unspoken contributions to a complex historical narrative that often ignores their fundamental role. It is a recognition that their lives, far from being mere background noise in the grand tapestry of medieval history, were themselves rich, textured, and deserving of deeper understanding and acknowledgment. They were the unseen hands that turned the wheels of a vast and intricate social machine, their silent labor supporting the grandeur of an era. May this work be a testament to their enduring presence, a whisper of recognition in the grand hall of history, a tribute to their unsung contributions, and a persistent effort to add to their often overlooked legacy. May their stories finally find a place in the sun, a space beyond the shadows of the forgotten. This, then, is a dedication not just to the past, but to the resilience and quiet dignity of those who served, and to the enduring power of human spirit. Chapter 1: A Day in the Life. The pre-dawn chill bit through Thomas's thin tunic like a swarm of angry wasps. He wasn't sure which was colder, the air or the stone floor of his meager room in the manor's servant quarters. The sounds of the manor house were just beginning to stir. A muffled cough from a distant chamber, the squeak of a mouse in the rafters, the creak of settling timbers, a symphony of discomfort that heralded the start of another brutal day. He rose, his joints protesting with the familiar stiffness of a man perpetually deprived of rest, and shuffled towards the rough-hewn wooden door. The meager light filtering through the tiny window painted long skeletal shadows across the room, turning the familiar objects, a chipped wooden bowl, a worn stool, a straw-filled pallet, into menacing figures in the gloom. His first task, as it was every single morning, was fetching water. The well was situated at the far end of the sprawling manor grounds, a seemingly endless distance in the pre-dawn darkness. He grabbed two heavy wooden buckets, their worn metal hoops digging into his calloused hands. The weight of them felt familiar, a leaden burden that mirrored the weight of his existence. Each step was a battle against the cold, each breath a ragged gasp against the biting wind. He could almost taste the icy air, a metallic tang coating his tongue. The rhythmic clang of the buckets against the stone well's rim was a monotonous percussion to the symphony of his misery. Each clang echoed the monotonous routine that defined his life, a cycle of back-breaking labor that seemed to stretch endlessly into the future. He imagined the manor's inhabitants, still tucked away in their warm beds, oblivious to the bitter realities that awaited him. realities as far removed from their comfortable existence as the stars were from the earth. He pictured them, snug in feather beds, the faintest glimmer of sunlight barely disturbing their sleep. The contrast was a bitter pill, swallowed daily with a resigned sigh. The buckets, brimming with icy water, pressed heavily into his hands, digging furrows into his already raw skin. He trudged back toward the manor, the icy water sloshing and the cold seeping into his already numb fingers. The manor loomed before him, an imposing stone behemoth, its grandeurs a stark juxtaposition to the shivering wretch hauling water to its heart. Even from a distance, he could smell the wood smoke and the scent of roasting meat, a delicious aroma that only served to underline the gaping chasm between him and the privileged inhabitants. The savory smells, so tantalizing, felt like a deliberate torment, a constant reminder of his hunger and the meager portions that awaited him. Inside the manor's kitchen, the air hung thick with the smells of baking bread, roasting meats, and the ever present stench of stale grease. It was a scene of controlled chaos, a whirlwind of activity that never ceased. He added his buckets to the growing pile near the massive stone sink, their icy contents a small rebellion against the sweltering heat of the ovens. His work began immediately, cleaning chamber pots, a task that could only be described as physically revolting and emotionally humiliating. The stench was almost unbearable, a pungent mix of human waste and the lingering odors of the previous day's meals. He scrubbed with grim determination, his movements precise and swift, honed by years of experience and the ever-present fear of reproach. Next came the scrubbing of the kitchen's enormous stone floors. His worn brush danced across the uneven surface, coaxing away the grime of countless meals and spilled drinks. He worked with quiet efficiency, his gaze never straying from the task at hand, his mind locked away from the bitter realities of his existence. The cold water seeped through his thin trousers, leaving him clammy and shivering, yet he worked on, driven by a mixture of habit and fear. A misplaced brushstroke, a moment of hesitation, could invite the wrath of the cook, a mountain of a man whose temper was as volatile as the fire in the hearth. Then came the preparation of breakfast, a seemingly endless process of chopping vegetables, grinding spices, and stirring porridge. The cook's instructions were terse and barked out in a gruff voice, each command a weight pressing down on Thomas's already burdened shoulders. He worked with mechanical precision, each movement a well-rehearsed response to the cook's demands. There was no room for error, no tolerance for mistakes. The rhythmic chopping and stirring were a constant drone that accompanied the relentless work. The sounds and smells created a hypnotic hum that permeated his consciousness, a backdrop to the ongoing physical and mental strain. Amidst this chaos, a small incident occurred that briefly punctuated the monotony. He stumbled, his hand knocking over a large pot of stew, the rich, meaty broth sloshing across the kitchen floor, sending a ripple of panic through his veins. For a moment, dread paralyzed him. The cook's wrath was legendary, his punishments harsh and unpredictable. Yet, with a mix of quick thinking and sheer dumb luck, Thomas managed to salvage the situation. He cleaned the mess swiftly and silently, his mind working at lightning speed, anticipating the cook's likely reaction and concocting a convincing explanation. The crisis averted, a faint smile played on his lips, a rare, fleeting moment of relief in the overwhelming tide of drudgery. It was a small victory, a brief moment of triumph over the crushing weight of his daily existence, a flicker of dark humor in the bleak landscape of his life. He knew it wouldn't last. The respite was as brief as it was precious. The remainder of the day followed in a similar vein, a relentless cycle of chores that bled into one another, a blur of physical exertion and mental strain. The silence imposed upon the servants was as oppressive as the weight of the buckets. They were expected to be seen and not heard, their opinions and feelings irrelevant, their presence merely functional. Yet, within that enforced silence, a subtle form of communication existed, a shared glance, a whispered word, a gesture that defied the rigid social hierarchy. These small acts of rebellion, however fragile, were vital, maintaining a sense of community amongst the staff, offering a sliver of human connection in a world of servitude. As the day drew to a close, the long shadows stretched across the kitchen, mirroring the weariness that filled Thomas's bones. The setting sun seemed to mock his unending toil, its fiery descent contrasting starkly with the cold emptiness that gripped his spirit. He slumped against a wall, his body aching, his mind numb. Even in the relative quiet of the evening, the threat of punishment or dismissal was a constant hum, an unspoken undercurrent that permeated every aspect of his existence. He was tired, bone deep tired, not merely physically, but emotionally and spiritually as well. He wondered, for the thousandth time, if this was all there was, an endless cycle of servitude, punctuated by moments of barely contained panic and brief, precious moments of dark humor. The silence of the dying day seemed to press in on him, a suffocating weight that reflected the weight of his situation, a nagging uncertainty about a missing ingredient, one the cook had been quite explicit about, left a lingering unease in his gut. He'd found it, yes, but not in the place the cook had indicated, and there were so many eyes in the kitchen, both those of the kitchen staff and the house staff. This night promised to be another long one, and for the first time in a long time, Thomas felt a tremor of genuine fear sun through his heart. The ending of this day might not be as quiet as it appeared. The rhythmic scrape of his brush against the stone floor was a counterpoint to the clatter of pots and pans, the sizzle of bacon, and the rhythmic thud of the cook's cleaver. The kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos, a whirlwind of activity that never ceased, a perpetual motion machine fueled by the endless demands of the manor house. Each task bled into the next, a relentless cycle of cleaning, chopping, stirring, and scrubbing. The air hung thick with the smells of roasting meats, baking bread, and the ever-present stench of stale grease, a potent perfume that clung to his clothes, his skin, his very being. He scrubbed at a stubborn stain near the hearth, the cold water seeping into his thin trousers, leaving him clammy and shivering. He worked with quiet efficiency, his movements honed by years of practice, his gaze fixed on the task at hand. His mind, however, was far away, drifting to the images of warmth and comfort he'd glimpsed through the cracks in the manor's daily life. Warm beds, soft fabrics, and the luxury of leisure. The contrast between his reality and the lives of the manor's inhabitants was a constant bitter pill he swallowed each day. The preparation of breakfast was a particularly grueling task. The cook, a burly man with a temper as volatile as the fire in the hearth, barked his orders with ruthless efficiency. Each instruction was a weight pressing down on Thomas's already burdened shoulders. He chopped vegetables with the precision of a seasoned butcher, his knife flashing in the flickering candlelight. He ground spices with a practiced hand, the aromatic powders filling the air with a heady perfume that couldn't mask the underlying smells of sweat and grease. He stirred porridge, a seemingly simple task that required constant attention, the slightest lapse in concentration risking a soupy mess and the cook's wrath. The rhythm of his work was broken only by the occasional interruption, a demand for more water, a request for a missing ingredient, a frantic search for a lost utensil. Each interruption was a small ripple in the tide of his daily routine, a reminder of the precariousness of his position. One wrong move, one misplaced item, could be enough to draw the cook's ire, leading to a reprimand, a punishment, or even dismissal. The fear of unemployment hung over him like a shroud, a constant reminder of his complete dependence on the whims of his masters. The mornings stretched on, an eternity of repetitive tasks that seemed to have no end. He cleaned chamber pots again, their foul contents a constant assault on his senses. He swept the floors, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the gloom of the kitchen. He scrubbed tables, countertops, and everything in between, his hands raw and bleeding. He peeled potatoes, his fingers numb with cold, his back aching from hours of bending. He was a machine, his body moving through a pre-programmed sequence of motions, his mind numbed by the monotony of it all. Mid-morning brought a brief reprieve in the form of a bread-making task that required some finesse and less brute strength. This seemingly small variation was a welcome change, though still not without a degree of difficulty. The rhythmic kneading of the dough allowed for a brief respite from the more strenuous labor, allowing him to focus on this one intricate task. The scent of yeast and flour was strangely comforting, a small island of pleasantness in the sea of unpleasantness that surrounded him. He was, however, mindful of his pace and precision. Any deviation from the process could lead to a subpar loaf, an outcome he couldn't risk. The smell of the baking bread was an allure he couldn't indulge. Such thoughts were only permissible after he had completed all his assigned tasks. But the respite was short-lived. The endless cycle of chores resumed, each task demanding his full attention, each moment a potential source of error. The weight of his responsibilities pressed down on him, a constant reminder of the precariousness of his position. He was a cog in a vast machine, his individual existence insignificant compared to the smooth running of the manor. He was merely functional, a body to be used and abused. The midday meal was a brief respite, a hurried affair consumed amidst the continuing bustle of the kitchen. The food was meager, a far cry from the rich feasts enjoyed by the manor's inhabitants. He ate quickly, his body craving sustenance, his mind already anticipating the resumption of his duties. Even the moments of rest were tinged with the ever-present fear of error and its potential consequences. He was a servant, and his existence was defined by the demands of others. The afternoon brought a new set of chores: polishing silverware, washing dishes, cleaning the pantry. Each task was a repetition of the morning's routine, a relentless cycle of physical labor that seemed to have no end. He polished the silverware until it gleamed, each piece reflecting his weary face back at him. He washed dishes, the hot water burning his hands, the soapy water leaving his skin raw and chapped. He cleaned the pantry, the shelves lined with jars and bottles, the air thick with the scent of spices and preserved foods. As evening approached, the kitchen began to wind down, the pace of work slowing, the noise abating. But the work did not cease. There were pots to scour, floors to sweep, and the remains of the day's meals to dispose of. A final wave of chores before the weary staff could finally rest. The cold water ran over the last of the dishes, the sound echoing in the quiet kitchen, and Thomas's weary arms felt the familiar sting of the harsh, gritty soap. This particular day's final task would have been simple enough, checking the larder for tomorrow's inventory, except for the fact that an important ingredient was missing. The cook's specific instructions and the stern look on his face flashed through his mind. The cook, after all, was not known for his patience. The day was finally over, the end of a relentless cycle, a seemingly never-ending cycle of drudgery. The kitchen, once a whirlwind of activity, was now silent, the only sound the occasional creak of the timbers, the ticking of a clock, and the soft thud of his own heartbeat. Thomas, exhausted, slumped onto a stool, the cold stone a stark reminder of his meager existence. The quiet of the evening pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. The long shadows of the setting sun seemed to mock his unending toil, their relentless lengthening mirroring the relentless cycle of chores he endured, day after day, week after week, year after year. He knew, with a grim certainty, that tomorrow would be much the same. His life was a relentless cycle, and even the momentary relief felt bittersweet knowing another day of servitude loomed. The quiet of the kitchen, a deceptive calm after the day's storm, was shattered by a sudden earth-shattering clang. A pot, brimming with a rich, savory stew, meant for the Lord's Supper, lay sprawled across the stone floor, its contents a gruesome, steaming landscape of carrots, potatoes, and unrecognizable hunks of meat. Thomas stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. His face, already pale from exhaustion, drained further, becoming the color of the flour dust coating his trousers. The air hung heavy with the scent of simmering herbs, now mingled with the acrid tang of spilled broth and the unmistakable aroma of impending doom. He'd been so engrossed in checking the larder, meticulously counting dried beans and verifying the stock of salt, that he'd completely forgotten the simmering pot on the hearth. A stray gust of wind, sneaking through a gap in the ill-fitting window, had apparently been the culprit, nudging the precarious pot to its untimely demise. His mind raced, calculating the potential consequences of this catastrophic failure. The cook's wrath, already a looming threat throughout the day, would be nothing compared to the Lord's displeasure. Dismissal was a certainty. Worse, perhaps even punishment. His gaze fell upon the scattered remnants of the stew. The rich broth had seeped into the cracks of the stone floor, leaving behind a glistening trail that seemed to mock his despair. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but years of navigating the treacherous currents of manor life had honed a certain level of resourcefulness. He couldn't simply stand there, paralyzed by fear. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. His eyes darted around the kitchen, frantically searching for a solution. The cook's absence, a rare stroke of good fortune, gave him a precious few minutes. He quickly assessed the situation, his mind working with a feverish intensity. He couldn't replace the stew. There wasn't enough time, nor did he possess the culinary skills to replicate the Lord's favorite dish. He needed a distraction, something to divert attention away from the catastrophic spill. His gaze fell upon a nearby bucket of freshly laundered linens, stiff, starched, and smelling faintly of lavender. An idea, audacious yet desperate, began to take shape in his mind. He grabbed the bucket, its weight strangely comforting in his trembling hands. He stealthily moved to a less conspicuous corner of the kitchen, his actions now driven by a focused energy that belied his initial panic. With surprising dexterity, he dipped a cloth into the spilled stew, then swiftly mopped up the mess. He worked with a speed and precision he hadn't known he possessed, his movements fueled by adrenaline and a burning desire to escape the impending punishment. His hands worked furiously, cleaning the floor with surprising efficiency. The scattered vegetables were painstakingly collected, their once vibrant colors now dulled and muddied. The remaining broth was carefully absorbed, leaving behind a damp patch that he hoped would dry quickly. He then carefully arranged the remaining cloth over the cleaned area. The bucket, strategically placed to conceal the damp patch, served as an effective visual barrier. The scene was far from perfect. It was a hastily constructed illusion, a carefully curated lie, but it was enough. Just as he was completing this frantic cleanup, the cook roared into the kitchen, his face as red as the spilled stew. "Thomas," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the room. "What in the name of all that's holy has happened here?" Thomas, armed with a carefully crafted expression of innocent bewilderment, pointed towards the bucket. "A mishap with the laundry cook," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I tripped and spilled a whole bucket of linens. Please forgive me, cook." The cook, ever suspicious and prone to fits of rage, did not initially notice the faint aroma of stew mingling with the scent of lavender. He was distracted by the sight of the spilled linens, which he believed to be a serious offense given the Lord's high expectations for cleanliness. This seemingly insignificant detail allowed Thomas a critical moment of reprieve. After a protracted scolding and a threat of punishment for such a clumsy act of ineptitude, the cook, distracted and convinced of the truth, turned his attention to the task of cleaning up the laundry incident. Thomas, relieved beyond measure, was able to discreetly remove the soiled cloth and carefully dispose of it without further incident. The Lord, fortunately, was preoccupied with a falconry demonstration and remained blissfully unaware of the kitchen crisis. That night, amidst the quiet clatter of cutlery being scrubbed clean, Thomas recounted the events of the day to his fellow servants. The story, initially told in hushed tones, soon erupted into a wave of boisterous laughter, a much-needed release of tension after a day of monotonous servitude. The near miss became a legend, a moment of dark humor that echoed through the echoing chambers of the medieval kitchen long after the last dish had been washed, a tale that transcended the everyday drudgery of their lives and served as a source of resilience in their relentless struggle for survival within the strict social hierarchy. It was a testament to his quick thinking and ingenuity, his ability to navigate the complexities of manor life with a blend of resourcefulness and a healthy dose of luck. More importantly, it proved that even in the most grim of circumstances, a moment of dark humor could serve as a vital lifeline, a brief reprieve from the overwhelming weight of daily life. The laughter echoing in the servants' quarters that night, however faint, was a powerful reminder of their shared humanity, their resilience, and their quiet victories in the face of adversity. It was a reminder that even within the rigid structure of medieval society, there was room for a little mischief, a dash of defiance, and a good laugh, even if it was tinged with a fair amount of fear. The weight of silence in the manor was a palpable thing, a thick blanket woven from fear and ingrained obedience. It hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the precarious position of those who served. A misplaced word, a misplaced glance, could unravel the carefully constructed fabric of their lives. Thomas, despite his recent near miss with the stew, knew this better than most. His reprieve had been a lucky break, a fleeting moment of grace in a life largely defined by the absence of such luck. That night, huddled around a meager fire in the servants' quarters, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp wool, the weight of that silence began to lift, just slightly. The room, a cramped space barely large enough to accommodate the half-dozen servants who shared it, was a hive of hushed activity. Ilara, a scrawny kitchen maid with eyes that held the weariness of a woman twice her age, meticulously mended a tear in her coarse linen shift. Across from her, Gareth, a stable boy whose hands were perpetually stained with grime, carefully sharpened a knife, his movements precise and economical. The rhythmic scrape of the blade against the whetstone was a counterpoint to the crackling fire. Thomas, his heart still fluttering from the afternoon's near disaster, recounted his story. His voice, initially hesitant, gained strength as he went along, the details of his escape from the cook's wrath bringing a wave of nervous laughter. It was a rare sound in this place, a ripple of mirth against the backdrop of constant toil. The laughter, though subdued, was a balm, a tiny act of rebellion against the oppressive silence imposed upon them. As he spoke, Thomas noticed the subtle communication between the other servants, a language unspoken yet understood, a shared glance between Alara and Gareth, a barely perceptible nod from Agnes, the chambermaid, acknowledged the risk they all took in sharing such a story. The very act of gathering together, of talking in itself, was an act of quiet defiance against the ever-present threat of their master's disapproval. It was the unspoken understanding of their precarious existence, the constant awareness of the social chasm that separated them from their betters, that united them. Agnes, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, when speaking to the higher classes, offered a wry comment. "He got lucky, that's all," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire. "One wrong step, and it's the stocks for him." The others murmured their agreement, a chorus of barely audible sighs. The fear was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, but tonight it was tempered by the camaraderie shared in the telling of Thomas's story. Their shared experiences, the myriad small humiliations and indignities they suffered daily, formed an invisible bond that transcended the differences in their tasks and stations. They were united by their shared servitude, by the weight of silence that pressed down on them. They knew that even a slight transgression could have dire consequences. A moment of carelessness, a misplaced word, a missed detail in their duties could lead to punishment, dismissal, or worse. Their stories, shared in hushed tones, painted a grim picture of their lives. There were stories of beatings meted out for the smallest of mistakes, stories of starvation and bitter cold, stories of illness and neglect. The stories were not just recountings of hardship, they were also subtle acts of resistance, small ways of reclaiming their narrative, their humanity, in a world where their voices were barely heard. The laughter, then, wasn't merely a response to Thomas's near miss. It was a cathartic release, a necessary venting of the pent up frustration and anxiety. It was a fleeting moment of solidarity, a brief respite from the ever present weight of their circumstances. It was a testament to their resilience, their ability to find moments of joy and connection amidst the unrelenting hardship. The conversation shifted to other aspects of their lives: the meager rations, the endless chores, the constant surveillance. They spoke of the subtle strategies they employed to make their lives slightly more bearable, the quiet barter of goods and favors, the hidden reserves of food, the carefully orchestrated moments of rest. One of the maids, a quiet girl named Mary, recounted how she had secretly saved a piece of leftover bread from the Lord's table, sharing it with the others. It was a small act, but it held a profound significance. It was a testament to their shared humanity, their mutual support in the face of relentless hardship. Another servant described the way they communicated with each other through subtle gestures and carefully veiled comments. A certain tilt of the head, a barely perceptible change in expression, could convey a wealth of information, a warning, or a message of support. It was a silent language, born out of necessity, a testament to their resourcefulness and resilience. They spoke of the ways they subtly resisted the dictates of their masters, the slight slowing of their work when they felt overburdened, the small acts of sabotage, a misplaced object here, a slightly burnt dish there, all calculated to subtly express their discontent without overtly challenging the authority of their masters. These acts were not acts of defiance, not exactly, but more like carefully placed pinpricks, little reminders that they were still there, still human, still possessing some small measure of agency in their lives. The conversation meandered, revealing glimpses into the lives of these unseen individuals, highlighting the complexity of their existence. They were not simply cogs in the great machine of the manor. They were individuals with hopes, fears, and dreams, bound together by a shared experience of servitude and a mutual understanding of the weight of silence imposed upon them. The very act of sharing their stories, of acknowledging their shared experience, was in itself an act of rebellion. It was a quiet assertion of their humanity in a world that sought to reduce them to mere instruments of the wealthy and powerful. As the fire died down and the hours crept towards dawn, the conversation gradually subsided, replaced by the soft sounds of sleep. The weight of silence returned, but it was a different silence now, a silence tinged with shared understanding, a silence that held within it the echo of laughter, of shared stories, of quiet defiance. It was a silence that for one night at least had been broken, replaced by a rare, precious sense of community and solidarity. The weight remained, but its burden felt for a moment bearable, even slightly lighter. The shared secret, the clandestine laughter, the whispered stories. These were their small victories, their quiet rebellions, their ways of enduring. And in those quiet acts of resistance, they found not just survival, but a fragile, hard won sense of community and human connection. The last rays of sun bled across the stone courtyard, painting long, skeletal shadows that stretched and writhed like accusing fingers. Thomas, his back aching with a dull, persistent throb, stumbled towards the servants' quarters, each step a testament to the relentless physical toll of the day. His hands, chapped and raw from scrubbing endless pots and pans, felt clumsy and unresponsive. The rhythmic clang of the kitchen's heavy ironware echoed in his ears long after he'd left the chaos behind, a discordant symphony accompanying the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. The manor, usually a vibrant tapestry of activity during the day, now settled into a heavy, oppressive quiet. The silence, however, was deceptive. It wasn't the peace of slumber, but the tense quiet before a storm, the hushed anticipation of potential catastrophe. It was a silence punctuated by the occasional creak of a distant door, the rustling of unseen figures, the muted sounds of footsteps padding across the cold stone floors. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every creak and groan of the ancient building took on an ominous quality. Even the air itself felt different. The warmth of the afternoon sun had vanished, replaced by a chilling dampness that seeped into his bones. He pulled his worn tunic tighter, a futile attempt to ward off the cold that seemed to penetrate every fiber of his being. The hunger gnawed at him, a persistent, relentless ache that mirrored the weariness in his muscles and the exhaustion in his soul. Reaching the servants' quarters, he found the space even more cramped and oppressive than usual. The meager fire, a pathetic flicker against the vastness of the room, cast dancing shadows that distorted familiar faces, making them seem gaunt and haunted. The air was thick with the smells of wood smoke, damp wool, and the ever-present scent of unwashed bodies. It was a smell he'd come to associate with the relentless cycle of toil and deprivation that characterized his life. Ilara, her face drawn and pale, was already asleep, her thin form curled into a fetal position on a straw pallet. Gareth, his eyes red-rimmed and heavy-lidded, sat hunched over a small wooden table, painstakingly cleaning his knife, the rhythmic scrape of steel a monotonous counterpoint to the fire's crackle. Agnes, her sharp features softened by exhaustion, meticulously mended a tear in her coarse linen apron. Even the usually boisterous Mary seemed subdued, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames with an unnerving intensity. Thomas dropped heavily onto his own pallet, his body protesting with a groan. He felt a bone-deep weariness that transcended mere physical exhaustion. It was a weariness of the soul, a sense of despair that seeped into the very marrow of his being. He had seen it in the eyes of the other servants, this crushing weight of hopelessness, this constant awareness of their precarious existence. It was the unspoken truth that hung over them like a shroud, a constant reminder of their insignificance. Tonight, however, a new element had been added to the usual mix of fatigue and fear. A sense of unease, a premonition of trouble hung in the air thick and cloying. It emanated from a whispered conversation he'd overheard earlier between two of the kitchen maids, a hushed exchange that spoke of a missing item, a misplaced ingredient, and the simmering wrath of the cook. It was a trivial thing, perhaps, a minor infraction in the grand scheme of the manor's workings, but in the context of their lives, it held the potential for disaster. The cook, a volatile woman with a temper as fiery as her stove, was known for her merciless punishments. A misplaced ingredient could easily lead to a tongue lashing, a brutal beating, or even dismissal, a sentence that was tantamount to death in their world. The thought sent a chill down Thomas's spine, a cold dread that clung to him like a second skin. He tried to shake off the fear, to push aside the unsettling feeling that something was wrong, but the unease persisted. He watched Gareth meticulously sharpen his knife, the rhythmic scrape of the blade a disquieting soundtrack to his growing apprehension. Was Gareth anticipating trouble? Was his knife preparation more than just a routine task? The thought was unsettling, fueling the already present anxiety. He glanced at Alara, her breathing shallow and uneven in her sleep. Her peaceful slumber was a stark contrast to the turmoil churning within him. He wondered if she, too, felt the undercurrent of apprehension that pulsed through the servants' quarters. Did she, with her sharp eyes and keen intuition, sense the impending storm? The silence, broken only by the rhythmic scrape of Gareth's knife and the occasional sigh from Agnes, pressed down upon him. It wasn't just the silence of exhaustion, it was the silence of fear, the silence of anticipation, the silence that preceded a blow. The weight of it was almost unbearable. As he drifted off to sleep, fragmented images flashed through his mind: the cook's furious face, the gleam of Gareth's knife, the shadowed corners of the manor, the lurking fear that colored every aspect of their existence. He slept fitfully, his dreams haunted by the chilling premonition that the coming day would bring something far worse than the usual toil and drudgery. He dreamt of shadows that danced and writhed, of whispers that carried threats, of a storm gathering on the horizon, a storm that threatened to engulf them all. The weight of the day, the weight of his position, the weight of the unspoken fear, it all pressed down upon him, promising a night of little rest and a dawn filled with dread. The quiet of the night held a hidden menace, a threat as pervasive as the ever-present chill of the manor itself. His unease grew, a knot tightening in his stomach, promising a day far different than the last. The following morning would indeed prove him right. The missing ingredient wasn't merely a misplaced item. It was a deliberate act of sabotage, the trail of suspicion, carefully woven throughout the night's whispers, led to a surprising culprit, and the consequences were far more drastic than a simple scolding. The seeds of discord planted in the previous evening's unease had blossomed into a full-blown crisis, threatening to unravel the fragile equilibrium of their lives within the manor's imposing walls. The evening's quiet apprehension had been a harbinger of the tempest to come, a chilling prelude to the events that would soon shatter the deceptive calm of their daily routine. The seemingly insignificant, missing ingredient would become the catalyst for a series of events that would expose the simmering tensions within the servants' quarters and the precarious balance of power within the manor itself. The simple act of forgetting, or perhaps a more deliberate act of rebellion, threatened to plunge Thomas and the other servants into a maelstrom of consequences, forcing them to confront the brutal realities of their lives and the ever present threat of their master's wrath. The night's quiet was a deceptive mask, hiding the turmoil that brewed beneath the surface. It was a mask that would soon be torn away, revealing the ugly truth of their existence and the desperate measures they might be forced to take to survive. The evening's uneasy calm was merely the eye of the storm. Chapter 2 lives intertwined. The following morning dawned gray and sullen, mirroring the mood in the servants' quarters. The usual bustle of preparation was muted, replaced by a hushed tension that clung to the air like damp wool. Thomas found Agnes huddled by the meager fire, her face paler than he'd ever seen it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. A racking cough shook her thin frame, leaving her trembling and weak. She clutched a stained rag to her mouth, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's worse today," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "The pain, it's unbearable." Agnes, the scullery maid, was a woman of quiet strength, known for her tireless work ethic and her unwavering stoicism. To see her reduced to such fragility was jarring, a stark reminder of the brutal toll the relentless work took on their bodies. The dampness of the manor, the endless scrubbing, the heavy lifting, all conspired to weaken her already frail constitution. She'd hinted at a persistent illness, a cough that plagued her for months, but had always brushed it aside, refusing to acknowledge the seriousness of her condition. Now, however, the pretense was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate vulnerability. Thomas offered her a meager bowl of lukewarm broth, the best he could manage from the scraps left over from the night before. She sipped it gratefully, her eyes closing momentarily as a spasm of pain racked her body. The fear in her eyes was palpable, a fear that went beyond the physical suffering. It was the fear of dismissal, the fear of being cast out into the unforgiving world with nothing but the tattered remnants of her worn-out clothes and a body ravaged by illness. Dismissal wasn't just the loss of a job, it was a death sentence, condemning her to starvation, homelessness, and a slow, agonizing death. The fear of illness and dismissal was a constant companion for all the servants, a shadow lurking in the corners of their daily lives. Thomas thought of Edward, the stable boy, a wiry lad with a surprisingly quick wit, hidden beneath a veneer of sullenness. Edward's life was a constant battle against the elements and the brutal demands of the stable master, a surly man with a penchant for violence and a disdain for those beneath him. The stable was a dangerous place, filled with the unpredictable moods of powerful animals and the ever-present threat of injury. Edward's hands were perpetually scarred and bruised, his body a testament to the physical toll of his work. But the physical dangers paled in comparison to the emotional burden he carried, the simmering resentment towards the stable master, and the hopeless feeling of being trapped in a cycle of backbreaking labor. The resentment towards the stable master was a common thread among the stable hands, a quiet rebellion simmering beneath the surface of their forced obedience. Thomas had overheard snippets of their conversations, hushed whispers in the dimly lit stable, curses muttered under their breath, and shared tales of petty acts of defiance. They would deliberately feed the horses less oats, leave the grooming incomplete, or subtly sabotage the stable master's attempts to maintain order. It was a passive resistance, a small rebellion against the tyranny of their overseer. But it was a dangerous game, one that could easily lead to brutal punishment or even expulsion. Eleanor, a lady in waiting, offered a stark contrast to the other servants. Her life was vastly different, cushioned by privilege and relative comfort. Yet, there was a hidden empathy, a secret compassion that set her apart from the other members of the household. Thomas had observed her from afar, witnessing her quiet acts of kindness toward the other servants. He'd seen her discreetly slipping extra food to Agnes, offering comforting words to Edward, and subtly easing the workload of the kitchen maids. Her actions were subtle, carefully concealed from prying eyes, but they were no less impactful, offering small acts of defiance and silent rebellion against the harsh realities of their existence. It was a fragile hope, a glimmer of kindness in a world of darkness, and this secret support system, woven from discreet acts of kindness and shared burdens, was an essential part of their survival. Eleanor, from her privileged position, was privy to information that could alleviate the suffering of the others. She also understood their vulnerability and the need for secrecy. She became an unexpected ally, operating in the shadows, providing a vital lifeline for the struggling servants. The interwoven struggles of Agnes, Edward, and Eleanor enriched the tapestry of the servants' lives, illustrating the complex reality beyond the monotonous chores and the constant fear. Their individual problems, Agnes's illness, Edward's dangerous work, and Eleanor's hidden acts of rebellion, were small dramas playing out against the larger backdrop of their shared existence. They were all bound together by their common experience of hardship, their collective dependence on the whims of their masters, and their shared longing for something better, a life beyond the oppressive walls of the manor. That day, the tension in the servants' quarters was almost palpable. The air crackled with unspoken anxieties, each servant grappling with their own internal battles. The seemingly insignificant event from the previous evening, the missing ingredient, continued to cast a long shadow. It was more than a simple oversight. It had become a symbol of the precariousness of their lives, highlighting the fragility of their positions and the potential consequences of any minor infraction. The incident served as a potent reminder of the unpredictable nature of their existence, a potent reminder of the constant threat of punishment and dismissal. The simmering resentments within the servants' quarters had been stirred, the quiet rebellion intensified. There were whispered conversations, furtive glances, and a sense of shared unease that permeated the very fabric of their existence. Each servant carefully navigated the precarious landscape of their daily lives, constantly assessing risks and rewards, calculating the potential cost of any action, any act of defiance, however minor. Agnes's illness cast a pall over everything. Her weakened state amplified the already existing anxieties, creating an atmosphere of heightened fragility. The fear of losing her, of being one person down, loomed large over everyone. Her presence, normally a source of quiet strength and resilience, had become a somber reminder of their mortality and the vulnerability of their shared fate. Edward, with his inherent suspicion and bitterness, saw the missing ingredient as a deliberate act of sabotage, a plot designed to bring misfortune upon one of them. He, along with others, began to suspect foul play rather than simple negligence. His eyes were darting, scanning the faces of the other servants, searching for the culprit. His resentment towards those he perceived to be potential enemies became palpable. The situation was dangerous, breeding suspicion, paranoia, and conflict among those who should have been standing together. Eleanor, quietly observing the rising tensions, stepped into the shadows to offer discreet support and counsel. She used her position to gather information, discreetly relaying warnings and guiding the other servants. Her actions were delicate maneuvers, fraught with danger. Discovery could lead to grave consequences, but she recognized the value of collective strength and sought to prevent a situation that could expose them all to the wrath of their masters. It was a dangerous game she played, but her commitment to safeguarding her fellow servants was unwavering. Her quiet rebellion was a source of strength and hope amidst the looming uncertainty. The atmosphere within the manor's walls was charged with tension, the quiet routine broken by an undercurrent of fear and suspicion. The seemingly trivial missing ingredient had ignited a series of events that threatened to unravel the already fragile social dynamics among the servants, bringing into stark relief the harsh realities of their daily lives and their perpetual vulnerability. The day unfolded with an ominous sense of foreboding, the weight of their precarious existence pressing down upon them, a constant reminder of their powerlessness in the face of the whims of their masters and the ever-present threat of the consequences of even the smallest of mistakes. The events of the day would forever alter the dynamics of their shared existence, forcing them to confront the brutal realities of their circumstances and the desperate measures they may have to take to secure their survival. The simmering unease transformed into an open wound that threatened to expose the fragile fabric of their lives, revealing the complexities of their shared experience and the resilience they would need to navigate the tumultuous days ahead. The afternoon sun, weak and watery, barely penetrated the thick stone walls of the manor. Inside, the chill was palpable, a reflection of the icy atmosphere that had settled over the servants' quarters. Lord Harrington, a man whose temper was as unpredictable as the English weather, had summoned Thomas to the great hall. The summons itself was a chilling experience. No servant ever went to the Lord unsummoned. To do so was an act of insubordination that could easily lead to a thrashing. Thomas, a wiry young man with eyes that held a mixture of weariness and defiance, adjusted the worn leather strap of his tunic, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He knew why he had been called. The missing saffron from the previous evening's stew, a seemingly trivial matter, had somehow escalated into a major infraction. He'd seen the simmering anger in Lord Harrington's eyes during the evening meal, and the Lord's sharp, pointed inquiries about the missing spice. The great hall was a cavernous space, dominated by a massive oak table that could easily seat 20. Lord Harrington sat at the head, his face a mask of displeasure, his gaze cold and assessing. Beside him sat Lady Anne, her expression carefully neutral, yet Thomas detected a hint of amusement in her eyes, a disturbing amusement that chilled him more than her husband's wrath. "Thomas?" Lord Harrington boomed, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Where is the saffron?" His tone held no trace of curiosity. It was an accusation, raw and blunt. Thomas swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. My lord, he stammered, I do not know. I checked the stores myself this morning, but his voice trailed off. He couldn't admit his own carelessness. It would be a confession of inadequacy, a guarantee of punishment. Lord Harrington's eyes narrowed. Do not lie to me, boy. The cook reports it missing. A simple oversight, you might think, perhaps, but a lack of attention to detail can lead to far greater consequences than a bland stew. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. This is a matter of order, a matter of discipline, and a matter of trust. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. The lack of trust was the most damning accusation. It was a sign that his position was tenuous, vulnerable. A single mistake could cost him everything. He didn't dare point out that it was the cook's responsibility to manage the spices. Such a statement would be seen as insolence. My lord, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I will search again. You will? Lord Harrington's voice dripped with sarcasm. Or you will find some other scapegoat to bear the brunt of your incompetence. The threat hung unspoken but clear. The alternative to finding the saffron was far worse than any punishment Lord Harrington could inflict directly. It was the potential blame placed on another innocent servant, leading to their punishment. The fear of being the reason for someone else's suffering was just as heavy as the fear of his own. His search was futile, of course. The saffron was gone. The cook, a portly man named Giles, was already whispering to Lord Harrington, subtly shifting blame. Thomas knew the game all too well. In this world of power dynamics, it was always best to stay silent, to absorb the blame, to be a shadow, rather than to risk speaking out. Later, he found Agnes huddled in the scullery, her cough racking her body. He offered her some bread, a small act of rebellion against the bleak reality of their lives. The bread was hard, stale, and barely enough to sustain her, but it was a gesture, a silent acknowledgment of their shared plight. He didn't dare mention the saffron. What was the point? It would only invite more trouble. The days that followed were a blur of back-breaking labor, punctuated by moments of quiet dread and simmering resentment. Edward, the stable boy, was nearly thrown from his horse when the beast reared, suddenly spooked by something. He'd barely escaped with a few bruises, but the incident served as a stark reminder of the ever-present dangers of their work. Eleanor, meanwhile, continued her quiet acts of rebellion. She discreetly slipped a warm shawl to Agnes, shared a piece of her own lunch with Thomas. These small acts were dangerous, of course. The servants were always observed, their movements scrutinized, but Eleanor, in her quiet, compassionate way, was defying the power structure, acting as a beacon of hope in their grim lives. One evening, as Thomas cleaned the Lord's chamber pots, a task that was never truly finished, as a new mess always appeared with the next sunrise, he discovered a small, intricately carved wooden box hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Inside, nestled amongst soft velvet, was a small pouch of saffron, identical to the one missing from the Lord's stew. The discovery shocked him. It was a revelation that could potentially shake the precarious balance of their power dynamics. The missing saffron wasn't negligence, not a simple mistake, but a deliberate act. And it wasn't Thomas who was responsible. The implication, chilling and terrifying, was that someone within the manor itself Someone with access to the Lord's private quarters had orchestrated the entire incident. But who and why? He knew he couldn't report it directly to Lord Harrington. His own confession of the discovery would risk revealing an element of intrigue beyond simple theft. Instead, he carefully replaced the saffron and the box, deciding to trust Eleanor's discretion with this explosive truth. He knew the fragile network of support they'd built was their only hope, the only chance to possibly escape the tyrannical whims of the masters. The unspoken power struggle, the silent rebellion continued. The fear of punishment, the ever present threat of dismissal, fueled by a deeper fear of starvation and homelessness, overshadowed every aspect of their daily lives. It was a world ruled by fear, where the slightest misstep could have devastating consequences. But even amidst this oppression, there was the flickering flame of resistance, quiet acts of defiance, shared burdens, and a secret compassion that bound them together, reminding them that they were not merely isolated individuals struggling against an oppressive system, but a collective of souls whose resilience and shared experience could perhaps, just perhaps, lead them towards a slither of hope. The discovery of the saffron, hidden in plain sight, ignited a spark of something akin to hope within Thomas. It was a fragile flame, easily extinguished, but it was there nonetheless. The knowledge that the incident wasn't simply his fault, that it was a deliberate act, shifted the power dynamic, even if only minutely. The fear remained, a constant companion, but now it was mingled with a different emotion, a quiet sense of empowerment. He sought out Eleanor, her nimble fingers currently mending a tear in a tapestry. He approached cautiously, speaking in hushed tones, relaying his discovery. Eleanor listened intently, her eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she merely nodded, a single, almost imperceptible movement, yet it spoke volumes. Trust, unspoken yet absolute, passed between them. Their unspoken pact was a testament to the strength of their shared experience, a bond forged in the crucible of hardship. They were not merely servants, they were a community, a clandestine network bound together by shared secrets, mutual support, and a quiet defiance of their oppressive circumstances. Their rebellion was not loud, it was subtle, hidden in the cracks of their daily lives. It was in the extra bread secretly shared, the whispered words of comfort, the silent exchange of a warm shawl on a frigid night. Agnes, whose frail body often succumbed to violent coughing fits, benefited greatly from their clandestine acts of kindness. Eleanor, with her innate resourcefulness, often managed to procure extra scraps of food from the kitchen, or perhaps a bit of extra fuel for the fire on particularly harsh nights. Edward, the stable boy, constantly battled against exhaustion and the ever-present dangers of his work, and he often received a reassuring hand, a shared cup of water, or a simple word of encouragement from Thomas or Eleanor. These small gestures were acts of profound solidarity, silent acts of rebellion against the brutal indifference of their masters. Their shared plight forged an unbreakable bond between them, a silent pact of mutual support. The harsh realities of their servitude, the backbreaking labor, the meager rations, the constant threat of punishment, only strengthened this connection. It was a bond built not on words, but on actions, on shared hardships and silent understandings. They found solace in each other's presence, a refuge from the bleakness of their daily lives. One particularly brutal winter evening, a fierce blizzard swept across the land. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the windows of the manor and sending icy drafts snaking through every crack and crevice. Inside, the servants huddled together for warmth, their bodies shivering despite the layers of worn clothing. Food was scarce. The rations had been meager for weeks. Desperation clung to the air, heavier than the falling snow. It was then, in that moment of shared vulnerability and despair, that their silent rebellion took on a new dimension. A plan, whispered and conceived in secrecy, began to take shape. They wouldn't actively confront their masters. Such a direct approach would surely lead to swift and brutal punishment. Instead, they would work subtly, cleverly, undermining the Lord's authority through small acts of resistance, one seemingly insignificant act at a time. They started by subtly sabotaging the Lord's attempts to maintain control. A misplaced document, a mysteriously broken tool, a slightly delayed task. Each small act of defiance was carefully calculated, its effect amplified by the cumulative weight of repeated disruptions. It was a slow burn, a war of attrition fought with ingenuity and patience. The subtle disruptions, initially ignored, gradually began to erode the Lord's authority, creating a sense of uncertainty and frustration that subtly undermined his rigid control. Meanwhile, Eleanor's quiet acts of kindness continued. She used her skills to mend and repair clothing, creating a sense of community and mutual support amongst the servants, creating resilience within their network. These acts of kindness, performed with quiet dignity and compassion, became a powerful antidote to the despair that constantly threatened to engulf them. One night, under the cloak of darkness, Eleanor slipped out of the manor. Her destination was a nearby village, where she contacted a sympathetic blacksmith, a man known for his quiet defiance of the Lord's arbitrary rule. She brought him a message, a list of grievances, a carefully crafted petition that detailed their hardships and injustices. The blacksmith, understanding the gravity of their situation and the inherent risks of open rebellion, pledged his support. He promised to discreetly spread the word amongst the local villagers, quietly building a wave of support that might just perhaps provide a long-term solution to their precarious existence. The risk was immense. If their actions were discovered, the consequences would be severe. But the desire for change, the yearning for a more just existence, outweighed the fear. They were not merely surviving, they were fighting. Their fight was not of swords and shields. It was a battle fought with quiet determination, with subtle acts of resistance, with a shared sense of hope that burned brightly in the darkness. Their struggle was a testament to the human spirit's ability to resist oppression, even in the most daunting of circumstances. It was a silent symphony of defiance, played out in the shadows of the medieval manor, a melody of resilience that echoed through the halls of history. The winter continued, but the icy grip of fear began to loosen its hold. In the silent acts of resistance, in the shared acts of kindness, a new dawn was slowly emerging. The hope, once a fragile flame, was now growing stronger, fueled by the embers of their shared rebellion. The relentless winter gnawed at their resolve, but a far more insidious enemy lurked within the manor walls: disease. The air, Thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, stale food, and overflowing chamber pots, was a breeding ground for infection. Agnes's persistent coughing, once a background hum to their lives, now echoed with a chilling intensity, a harbinger of the ever present threat. Her frail frame, already weakened by malnutrition, was succumbing to something far more sinister. The living quarters of the servants were cramped and damp, barely affording each individual enough space to lie down. Wooden pallets, strewn with straw that had long since lost any semblance of cleanliness, served as beds. Lice, fleas, and other parasites thrived in the darkness, their bites incessant reminders of their squalid environment. Water, a precious commodity, was sparingly used, further contributing to the pervasive grime and the rapid spread of disease. Washing clothes was a Herculean task, often delayed due to lack of time, energy, or the sheer lack of adequate water and heating facilities. The clothes, when finally washed, often remained damp, promoting the growth of fungi and bacteria. The constant presence of livestock within the manor compound didn't help. The stench of animal waste mingled with the human odors, creating a toxic cocktail of bacteria and viruses. Rats, carriers of bubonic plague and other diseases, scurried freely throughout the building, their presence a constant source of dread. Even the food, often meager and stale, was a potential vector for infection. Spoiled meat, contaminated vegetables, these were commonplace, resulting in bouts of diarrhea, dysentery, and other gastrointestinal ailments. Agnes's cough worsened, evolving into a rattling symphony of pain. Her skin, already pale, took on a sickly gray hue. Her body, consumed by fever, trembled uncontrollably. Eleanor, her heart heavy with worry, tended to her, her movements gentle and compassionate. She procured whatever meager remedies were available, herbs gathered from the nearby woods, a few drops of honey, perhaps a bit of warm broth salvaged from the kitchen scraps. But such remedies were as likely to offer little respite as they were to potentially worsen her condition. The knowledge that she was helpless against the cruel hand of disease was a weight that pressed upon Eleanor's heart. The fear of disease was not limited to Agnes. It hung in the air, a palpable presence that permeated every aspect of their lives. Every scratch, every ache, every slight fever sent shivers down their spines. The casual acceptance of death was a peculiar paradox. Death, frequent and unpredictable, was viewed with a strange mixture of resignation and stoic acceptance. Yet, every individual death was a tragedy, a stark reminder of their own mortality. The fear wasn't necessarily of dying, but of dying alone, unattended, and unmourned. There was a communal dread that haunted them, a collective fear that one might succumb to illness and simply fade away, unnoticed in the bustling chaos of the manor's daily routines. Edward, the stable boy, developed a debilitating fever, his normally robust body weakened by fatigue and undernourishment. He suffered from bouts of dizziness and intense chills, making his daily work impossible. The threat was amplified by the fact that the stables were often unhygienic and cramped, filled with the lingering scent of animal dung, hay, and stale sweat. He lay in his small stall, shivering despite wrapping himself in layers of old blankets. Thomas, despite his own exhaustion from his work in the kitchen, found time to bring Edward water, a few pieces of stolen fruit, and words of encouragement. Thomas himself felt a persistent headache, coupled with a growing weariness that slowed his movements. He recognized the telltale signs of an oncoming illness, a familiar enemy he had encountered numerous times before. He knew that rest was essential, yet the endless work never ceased. His role as a kitchen hand meant that any day off could cause a ripple effect of chaos, so he ignored his illness. The fear of punishment, of unemployment, outweighed the fear of falling ill. Every day was a battle for survival, a struggle against starvation, exhaustion, and the constant threat of disease. The manor itself contributed to the spread of disease. The lack of proper sanitation, the cramped living quarters, and the lack of adequate ventilation created a breeding ground for infectious agents. The privy was a simple hole in the ground, a source of constant odor and a potential source of water contamination. Garbage was often dumped nearby, attracting vermin and amplifying the risk of disease transmission. The very fabric of their lives was woven with the threat of illness and premature death. Disease was not just a physical threat, it was also a social and economic one. Illness meant lost wages, lost productivity, and a downward spiral towards destitution. Servants had no social safety net, no sick leave, no unemployment benefits. If they fell ill, they were often dismissed, left to fend for themselves in a world that offered little mercy. The grim reality was that illness often led to homelessness and death. Eleanor, ever resourceful, attempted to create a semblance of cleanliness within their cramped quarters. She used whatever meager supplies she could find: rainwater collected from the roof, a few scavenged rags, some stolen ash from the hearth, to attempt to maintain a modicum of hygiene. However, her efforts were often futile. The sheer scale of the problem was simply too overwhelming. The deaths of Agnes and Edward came swiftly, one following the other. Their passing was met with a mixture of grief and resignation. Their bodies, wrapped in simple shrouds, were quietly buried in a shallow grave outside the manor walls. There were no elaborate funerals, no mourning ceremonies, just a quiet acknowledgment of their absence. Life in the manor continued, albeit with a heavier heart. The remaining servants carried on, their lives marked by the ever-present threat of illness and the shadow of mortality. The fragility of life, the casual acceptance of death, it was woven into the very fabric of their existence, a stark reality they had to confront every day. The memory of their lost companions served as a constant reminder of the precariousness of their own lives, fueling their quiet rebellion, their silent fight for survival. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls of the servants' quarters, a stark contrast to the opulent tapestries and gleaming silver that adorned the Lord's Hall just a few feet away. A nervous hush had fallen over the remaining servants, a heavy silence broken only by the occasional cough or the restless shifting of bodies on their straw pallets. The recent deaths of Agnes and Edward, claimed by the relentless grip of disease, hung heavy in the air, a palpable reminder of their own mortality. Then, a sharp crackle shattered the stillness. It started subtly, a faint scent of smoke mingling with the usual odors of sweat, damp wool, and decaying straw. At first, it was dismissed as nothing more than a dying ember from the hearth, a common occurrence in the drafty manor. But the smell intensified, growing sharper, more acrid, accompanied by a faint crackling sound that seemed to emanate from the direction of the kitchens. Fear, sharp and sudden, pierced the quiet. Thomas, despite his lingering headache and the bone deep weariness that clung to him like a shroud, was the first to react. His keen senses, honed by years of working in the cramped confines of the kitchen, detected something beyond the usual nighttime noises of the manor. He sprang to his feet, his movements jerky and hesitant due to his illness, but his instincts were sharp. He smelled smoke, and his heart pounded in his chest. A low murmur rippled through the room as the others awoke, their sleep disturbed by the unfamiliar scent and sounds. Eleanor, her face pale in the dim light, grabbed a discarded lantern, her fingers trembling slightly as she struck the flint. The weak flame sputtered to life, illuminating her anxious face and the growing panic in the eyes of the others. The flickering light revealed a growing plume of smoke seeping from beneath the heavy oak door that separated the servants' quarters from the kitchen. The air, already thick with the smell of stale food and dampness, now carried the bitter tang of burning wood and something else, a sickeningly sweet smell that made their stomachs churn. Panic threatened to overwhelm them, but Eleanor, ever practical, quickly assessed the situation. "The kitchens!" she exclaimed, her voice tight with urgency. "We need to get to the well, and then we need to help Thomas." The well, a short distance from the manor, was their only source of water, and they knew their ability to fight the fire depended on it. They moved with a terrifying mix of adrenaline and dread, the fear of fire mingling with the ever-present fear of illness and death. Every creak of the wooden floors, every rustle of the rats in the walls seemed to amplify their apprehension. Reaching the well, they worked swiftly, filling every available container, buckets, pitchers, even chipped bowls with water. But the fire was spreading rapidly, consuming the wooden beams and thatched roofs with alarming speed. The flames licked at the walls, casting an eerie red glow on the faces of the terrified servants. The crackling and roaring of the flames threatened to engulf the entire manor. They raced back towards the kitchens, the heat from the flames already intense. Thick, choking smoke billowed from the doorway, making it impossible to see inside. The fear of being trapped, of suffocating in the smoke-filled air, threatened to paralyze them. Yet, they pressed on, driven by a desperate hope to save their colleague. Through the thick smoke, they saw Thomas, coughing violently, his face streaked with soot, battling the flames with whatever meager resources he could find. He was surrounded by burning debris, frantically trying to extinguish the flames with a rag and a bucket of water. He was clearly overwhelmed, his efforts hopeless. With a collective effort, they managed to drag Thomas to safety, his body limp and weak. The water they had brought did little to quell the inferno, and the flames continued to rage. The fire alarm had been sounded only to bring the manor's inhabitants to the site of the ever-expanding fire. The Lord and his family watched the events unfold from a safe distance. The manor's inhabitants, including the Lord and Lady, had been alerted by the commotion, but their reaction was far from comforting. They watched from a distance, their concern muted by the obvious danger to themselves. The servants, left to their own devices, were resigned to the worst. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of orange and gray, the fire finally began to subside. Much of the kitchen and a section of the manor were reduced to ashes, but the servants' quarters, miraculously, remained largely untouched. The fire, though devastating, had brought them together. They had faced death together, not from disease, but from the consuming flames. It was a harrowing night, a night that tested their resilience, revealing their courage and resourcefulness in the face of unimaginable fear. Their lives continued as before, but something had shifted within them. The fear of the night would never completely vanish. Their lives, perpetually precarious, had been pushed to the brink once again. But their bond, forged in the crucible of fire, had grown stronger. They had survived together, and that, in itself, was a small victory in their ongoing battle for survival. The memory of the fire became a shared story, a grim reminder of their shared vulnerability. Each servant found themselves looking into the darkness with a deepened sense of dread that lingered with them long after the flames had died down. The quiet fear of the manor never quite left them. The fire, in its destructive path, had woven itself into the tapestry of their lives, a stark and unforgettable scar that underscored their shared experience and their collective resilience. Chapter 3: Echoes of the Past. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to Thomas's clothes days later, a phantom scent that haunted him even as he scrubbed at the stubborn stains. He found himself glancing nervously at the remaining timbers of the kitchen, now a skeletal reminder of the inferno that had nearly consumed the manor. The experience, brutal and terrifying, had shaken him to his core. But it wasn't just the immediate danger of the fire that weighed on him. It was the chilling realization that the vulnerability he'd felt that night echoed in the lives of countless others, across centuries and social strata. He looked at Eleanor, who was meticulously polishing the silver, her movements precise and almost mechanical. The fire had left her shaken, but she'd returned to her duties with a grim determination. Their lives were a constant cycle of labor, punctuated by moments of fear and uncertainty. Their existence, dictated by the whims of their masters, was a precarious dance on the edge of disaster. He thought of the countless hours spent scrubbing floors, cleaning chamber pots, tending to the endless needs of the lord and lady, their work rarely acknowledged, their existence often overlooked. Yet, as he reflected on the events of that night, a strange parallel began to form in his mind. He'd overheard snippets of conversation amongst the manor's inhabitants, discussions of the bustling city, of merchants and tradesmen, of the ever-increasing demands of a growing society. He'd even glimpsed, from a distance, the hurried comings and goings of those who served in the city's taverns and inns, their faces etched with the same weariness and desperation that he felt. Those fleeting glimpses began to crystallize into a startling realization. Their struggles, though separated by centuries, mirrored those of countless others. Their plight, while framed within a medieval context, resonated with the challenges faced by those in modern service industries. Consider the hotel maid, he thought, tirelessly cleaning room after room, enduring the disdainful glances of some guests, the impossible expectations of others, all for a meager wage. Her days are filled with the relentless demands of her job, the constant pressure to maintain a spotless environment, often without proper acknowledgment for her work. Her work, like his own, is often unseen, her labor taken for granted. She, too, is vulnerable, dependent on the goodwill and the whims of her employer, her employment subject to fluctuating economic tides, often unpredictable, a missed deadline, a guest complaint, and her job hangs in the balance, or the waitress in the bustling tavern of a modern city. The relentless pace, the endless stream of customers, the pressure to remain cheerful and attentive despite the exhaustion and the occasional insults, these parallels to his own experiences were striking. The weight of expectation, the invisible emotional labor required to maintain a pleasant demeanor despite the stresses of the job, echoed in the silent servitude he had endured within the manor. She, too, battles the unseen pressures of her employment, the unspoken expectations that form an invisible wall between her and her employers. The demands on her emotional reserve are not measured in wages or recognition. Even the modern office worker, seemingly removed from the direct service industry, shares some surprising similarities. The pressure to meet deadlines, the relentless demands of superiors, the often thankless hours spent on projects that seem to lack purpose, these mirror the subtle but pervasive power dynamics of his own medieval world. The servitude may not be as explicitly physical, but the sense of obligation, the feeling of constant appraisal and potential judgment, create an analogous experience of precarious employment. The similarities extended beyond the emotional and psychological pressures. In both medieval and modern settings, service workers faced precarious employment conditions, often at the mercy of an employer's whim. A slight mistake, a moment of carelessness, or even an unfortunate accident could lead to dismissal, leaving them destitute and vulnerable. The lack of job security, a perennial issue faced by those in service professions in every age, created a constant state of anxiety and uncertainty. One day employed, the next day searching for another opportunity. There is little differentiation between Agnes and Edward's vulnerability and the vulnerability of a modern office worker who may be made redundant. The insecurity exists despite the change in time. The class dynamic, too, remains strikingly similar. In both eras, those who serve are often marginalized, their voices unheard, their contributions minimized. The inherent power imbalance, the stark contrast between the comfortable lives of the privileged and the difficult conditions of the servants, remains a constant. The lord and lady of the manor, comfortably ensconced in their wealth and power, are echoed in the executives and CEOs of modern corporations, their lives seemingly unaffected by the struggles of those who work to support their lifestyles. Even the seemingly mundane tasks share a surprising continuity. The cleaning, the cooking, the laundry, the essential aspects of daily life, necessary but often undervalued, remain largely unchanged. The effort of keeping the lord and lady's environment sanitary is no different to the hotel maid's effort to maintain a clean guest room. One is rewarded with a meal, the other with a wage, but the effort remains, the result remains, and the intrinsic value remains as unseen and as essential as ever. The echoes of the past, therefore, are not merely historical curiosities, but stark reminders of ongoing inequalities and exploitative labor practices. The conditions of medieval servants, far from being a distant historical anomaly, resonate with the experiences of service workers today. The fundamental power dynamics, the precariousness of employment, the constant pressure to meet unrealistic expectations, these are elements that transcend time and society. The fire in the manor's kitchen was a terrifying event, but its lessons extended far beyond the ashes and smoke. It illuminated a deeper truth, revealing a continuity of struggle, a shared experience of vulnerability that binds together the seemingly disparate lives of medieval servants and their modern counterparts. The burning of the kitchen was more than just a fire. It was a symbol of the ever present precariousness of their lives. The lessons learned from the inferno weren't limited to fire safety. The experience had a profound impact on the community that developed after the flames died down. The servants, sharing a common bond forged in a near death situation, understood each other better, supporting each other not only in the tasks of rebuilding, but also in the quiet, unspoken understanding of their shared vulnerabilities. Thomas noticed the subtle shift in their interactions, a newfound camaraderie that transcended the usual hierarchies of the manor. Their shared experience, terrifying as it was, had created a stronger bond, a silent acknowledgment of their shared fate, and a deepened sense of mutual reliance. This silent solidarity was, in its own way, a quiet act of rebellion against the silent indifference of their superiors. They were now a small, close knit community fighting for survival together. Even in the face of such stark hardship, the shared trauma had that unexpected consequence of forging a stronger sense of community amongst the servants. There was a quiet understanding, a shared glance across the hall that spoke volumes of their shared experiences. It wasn't a rejection of their positions or of their duties, but rather a subtle, internal shift in perspective. They had faced mortality together, and the reality of their shared vulnerability had forged a bond stronger than any enforced hierarchy. The shadow of the fire cast a long stretch over their lives. The memory of the smoke, the heat, the fear, these became silent reminders of their shared experiences, and these quiet reminders created a small, resilient community. The manor walls remained cold. The routines continued with the same endless loop of tasks, but within the servants' quarters there existed a quiet, resilient solidarity, a community born of shared experience and a common understanding of vulnerability. Their solidarity was a silent testament to their strength, a recognition of a shared struggle against an indifferent world. The fire had changed them, and their shared understanding ensured that it was not just a traumatic memory, but a powerful catalyst for mutual support and a silent act of resistance against the ever present realities of their exploited lives. The echoes of that night's experience would serve as a constant reminder of their vulnerability and, paradoxically, their strength. The embers of the kitchen fire had long since faded, but the heat of its impact lingered. The rebuilding was a slow, arduous process, mirroring the slow, arduous process of rebuilding lives shattered by the constant pressure of servitude. The physical scars healed, but the emotional wounds remained, subtle yet pervasive, etched into the very fabric of their beings. Eleanor, her hands still bearing the faint marks of a burn sustained during the fire, continued her duties with an almost unsettling quietude. Her movements, once precise and mechanical, now carried a certain weariness, a resignation born of years spent navigating a system designed to keep those who served perpetually on the precipice of despair. The fire, however, had inadvertently altered the power dynamics within the servants' quarters. It had revealed a shared vulnerability, a common ground upon which a different kind of community could flourish. The unspoken solidarity that had emerged amongst the servants in the aftermath of the inferno was a remarkable testament to their resilience, a quiet rebellion against the established order. It was a testament to the strength of the human spirit, its ability to find connection and support even in the most adverse circumstances. Thomas, usually reserved and quiet, found himself sharing stories with the other servants, stories of their pasts, their families, their dreams, a shared vulnerability that transcended the rigid hierarchy of the manor. Their conversations were hushed, cautious, but they were filled with a newfound sense of kinship. This quiet rebellion, however, was not without its risks. The slightest hint of dissent could result in swift and brutal punishment. The fear of reprisal hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of their precarious position. Yet, the shared experience of the fire had emboldened them, given them a sense of shared agency they had not previously possessed. Their quiet acts of support, a shared meal, a helping hand, a word of encouragement, were small acts of defiance against a system that sought to keep them isolated and vulnerable. The legacy of servitude extended far beyond the individual experiences of Thomas and Eleanor. It was woven into the very fabric of medieval society, shaping its social structures, its cultural attitudes, and its power dynamics. The rigid class system, with its stark hierarchy, reinforced the inequalities inherent in the system of servitude. The nobility, shielded by their wealth and power, remained largely oblivious to the struggles of those who served them, their lives a stark contrast to the relentless labor of those lower in the social hierarchy. The system of inherited positions, where birth determined one's station in life, ensured that servitude, often passed down through generations, became an inescapable reality for many. The cultural attitudes of the time further perpetuated this inequality. Servants were often viewed as mere extensions of their masters' wills, their thoughts and feelings considered inconsequential. The silence expected of them reinforced their subordinate status, silencing their voices and contributing to their invisibility within society. The narrative of the time reinforced this hierarchical framework, rarely acknowledging the contributions of those who served, often rendering them silent, faceless figures in the tapestry of medieval life. The lack of legal protections for servants only exacerbated their vulnerability. They were entirely at the mercy of their masters, with little recourse against unfair treatment or abuse. The lack of agency they possessed extended not only to the work they performed, but to their very lives, with their personal lives subject to the demands of their masters, their free time limited and dictated by the whims of those who employed them. Even the seemingly mundane aspects of their lives were shaped by the system of servitude. Their food, their clothing, their living conditions all reflected their subordinate status. The lack of access to education, health care, and other basic amenities further reinforced their marginalized position within society. Their limited social mobility further reinforced the deep-seated inequalities of the system of servitude. The absence of any possibility of social movement cemented their position in an unending cycle of servitude. The long-term consequences of servitude extended far beyond the confines of the individual lives of the servants. The system's legacy could be seen in the perpetuation of social inequalities across generations. The children of servants often followed in their parents' footsteps, inheriting a life of servitude, thus creating a cycle of deprivation and inequality. This continuous legacy of social inequality, passed from one generation to the next, had a significant impact on society as a whole. The lack of opportunities, the limited access to resources, and the constant threat of poverty stifled social progress and economic development. This system of perpetuated inequality restricted not only the personal development of those who served, but also limited the development of society as a whole. The lack of investment in human capital, both in education and healthcare, significantly impacted societal advancement. The echoes of medieval servitude resonate even in the modern world. The exploitation of labor, the precariousness of employment, and the power imbalances that characterize many workplaces today are all stark reminders of the enduring legacy of servitude. While the forms of servitude have evolved, the fundamental issues of inequality and exploitation remain strikingly similar across historical periods. The patterns of exploitation, the inequalities inherent in the employment relationship, and the unequal distribution of wealth continue to resonate strongly in many modern contexts. The fight for social justice and equality is, therefore, not simply a matter of addressing present day inequalities, but also of acknowledging and confronting the historical roots of these issues. The fight for workers' rights, for fair wages, for safe working conditions, and for an end to exploitation is, in essence, a continuation of the struggle waged by medieval servants and countless others who have toiled in servitude throughout history. The fight for equality and justice is a continued narrative, building on the legacy of those who served. The ongoing struggle is not merely a contemporary fight, but a fight rooted in centuries of struggle and sacrifice, seeking to break free from the legacy of oppression and inequality. The lessons learned from the fire, the shared vulnerability, the quiet solidarity forged in the face of adversity, these were more than just momentary responses to a crisis. They were seeds of resistance, planted in the fertile ground of shared experience, capable of bearing fruit in the long struggle for social justice. The legacy of servitude, while a dark and painful one, serves as a powerful reminder of the ongoing need for empathy, for social reform, and for a relentless pursuit of equality and justice for all. The echoes of the past must serve not only as a reminder of the past, but as a powerful call for a fairer and more equitable future, a future that rejects the patterns of exploitation and oppression of the past. The struggle continues. My dearest sister, Ilara, if this letter ever reaches you, know that I am still alive, though barely. The life of a servant is not one I would wish upon my worst enemy, and yet here I am, another year older, another year weathered by the relentless grind of endless chores and the chilling indifference of those we serve. They call this manor Oakhaven, a name as ironic as the gilded cages within its walls. For us, it's more a prison of polished wood and starched linens, a place where smiles are currency and silence is survival. Remember our childhood, Ilara? The fields of wildflowers, the laughter echoing through the village, the simple joy of a shared loaf of bread. That feels like a lifetime ago, a dream fading with each passing day. Here, my days blur into a monotonous rhythm. Rise before dawn, clean the chamber pots, scrub the floors, wash the endless piles of laundry, linens so fine they feel like cobwebs against my calloused hands. The smell of lye and mildew clings to me like a second skin, a constant reminder of my place in this world. And the food, Alara, the scraps that find their way to our table, are barely enough to sustain a bird, let alone a woman who toils from sunrise to sunset. Sometimes, a kind kitchen maid will slip me an extra bit of bread, a stolen apple, a gesture of compassion that warms me more than any fire. Such small acts of kindness are the rare glimmers of hope in a life otherwise defined by drudgery. The work is brutal, physically demanding. My back aches constantly. My hands are perpetually raw, and the chill of the drafty manor seeps into my bones. The winters are especially cruel, with frostbite a constant threat, and yet the physical pain is almost bearable compared to the emotional toll this life exacts. The constant humiliation, the unspoken contempt, the feeling of being invisible, these are the wounds that never fully heal. We are seen, but not noticed, heard, but not listened to. We are the shadows that move silently through the grand halls of Oakhaven, anticipating the needs of those who hardly acknowledge our existence. One day, I accidentally broke a goblet belonging to Lady Alice. It wasn't even a particularly valuable one, just one of many in her collection, but her reaction was like a thunderbolt. The words she used to chastise me were worse than any physical punishment, piercing me with a level of disdain I'll never forget. I still tremble at the memory of her eyes, sharp and cold, assessing me as if I were a piece of broken pottery, easily discarded. For days after, I felt the weight of her disapproval, the burden of my inadequacy. Mistakes are unforgivable, Ilara. A misplaced cup, a slightly wrinkled sheet, a smudge on a polished surface. Any of these could mean dismissal, leaving us to wander the unforgiving landscape beyond the manor walls, facing starvation and destitution. The fear of unemployment is a constant companion, a shadow lurking at the edge of my vision. It's the sword of Damocles hanging over our heads, ensuring our unquestioning obedience. The other servants are as much prisoners as I am. We share the same hardships, the same anxieties, the same silent prayers for a life beyond this drudgery. We find comfort in small things, a shared smile, a helping hand, a whispered word of encouragement. We create a world of our own within the confines of our allotted space, a world of unspoken solidarity and shared resilience. We cling to these connections, for they are the only things that keep us sane. There is a certain grim humor in our situation. Sometimes I find myself laughing at the sheer absurdity of it all. The ironies of a system that glorifies extravagance while condemning those who make it possible. We laugh through tears, our laughter a rebellion against the relentless weight of servitude. It's a shared joke, a way of finding a sliver of joy in the midst of despair. We have our stories, Ilara, stories of resilience, of shared struggles, of quiet acts of defiance. We have our dreams too, though they are often whispered in the dead of night, for to voice them aloud would be to invite ridicule, to invite further suffering. But we hold onto those dreams as tightly as we can, for they are the faint embers of hope that keep our spirits alive. I do not know if I will ever escape this life, Ilara, but if you ever receive this letter, know this: I am not defeated. I have learned to survive, to find strength in adversity, to find community in shared hardship. Perhaps that is all that matters, the knowledge that in the darkness of servitude, we are not alone. We endure together, and we hope together. The other day, I saw Thomas, one of the stable boys, trying to teach a young stable hand to read, using scraps of parchment and a worn quill. It is a small thing, a clandestine act of kindness, yet it filled me with such hope. It's a testament to the quiet rebellion that burns within us, a refusal to let our circumstances define us. Perhaps, Ilara, this is the legacy of servitude, not only the enduring memory of hardship, but also the unwavering resilience of the human spirit. And yet, even in this quiet rebellion, the constant fear of discovery lurks. The slightest whisper of dissent could lead to brutal punishment, swift dismissal, or even worse. The consequences of defiance are severe, a stark reminder of our position within the rigid social hierarchy. The silence imposed upon us is a tool of oppression, a silencing that echoes through centuries. But the human spirit is remarkable. Even in the face of such oppressive conditions, hope flickers. In the shared glances, the stolen moments of conversation, and the small acts of mutual support, we find a powerful sense of community. This connection transcends the rigid structures of the manor, creating a fragile yet enduring solidarity among the servants. Our shared experience forges a bond that is stronger than any decree from our masters. Our hope lies in the faint possibility of a future different from the one we know. It is a future that might include opportunities for growth, for freedom from endless drudgery, and for the possibility of a life beyond servitude. This hope is what fuels our quiet defiance, our whispered dreams, and our enduring commitment to one another. I know that I may never know the freedoms you do, Ilara, but I will continue to fight for a better life, however small the chance, and I pray that someday the memory of our childhood laughter will bring you comfort as it brings me strength. Until then, I remain your loving sister, Isadora. The tapestry of medieval life, as it's often depicted, is a grand, vibrant scene dominated by kings and queens, knights in shining armor, and pious monks. But step closer, peer into the shadowed corners, and you'll find another narrative unfolding. A quieter, grittier story woven from the threads of countless lives lived in servitude. These are the stories of the cooks, the scullery maids, the stable hands, the chamberlains, and all the unseen hands that kept the wheels of medieval society turning. History, in its grand pronouncements, often overlooks these individuals, relegating them to footnotes or silent figures in the background. This, however, is a profound oversight, for their contributions, though largely unsung, were integral to the functioning of the period. To truly understand the medieval world, we must move beyond the romanticized images and delve into the lives of those who served. Their experiences, the relentless toil, the pervasive insecurity, the constant threat of dismissal, offer a stark counterpoint to the narratives that focus solely on the lives of the elite. Their stories reveal a social structure far more complex and nuanced than the simplified models often presented. Traditional historical accounts often portray servants as mere cogs in the machinery of medieval society, their lives lacking significance beyond their function. This perception stems from a number of factors. First, the written record itself is biased. Most historical documents were created by the ruling class, reflecting their perspectives and priorities. The voices of servants, if they existed at all, were rarely documented. Their experiences were largely oral, passed down through generations in the form of stories and songs, often lost to the passage of time. Second, the very nature of their work often excluded them from the formal structures of society. They lacked the property, education, and social standing to leave a significant mark on official records. Their contributions were often practical and mundane, seemingly insignificant when compared to the grand political and religious events that dominate traditional histories. Third, there's a tendency to romanticize the past, to gloss over the harsh realities of everyday life. The image of medieval servants is often colored by nostalgic portrayals, focusing on their perceived loyalty and devotion to their masters. This overlooks the often brutal realities of their existence: the long hours, the meager wages, the constant threat of punishment, and the total dependence on the whims of their employers. Reevaluating the history of medieval servants necessitates a shift in perspective, a recognition of the limitations of traditional historical sources, and an active search for alternative evidence. Archaeological findings, for instance, can offer insights into the material conditions of servants' lives, the size of their quarters, the quality of their clothing, the types of tools they used. However, archaeological findings only provide snippets of their lives. It is extremely hard to extrapolate how they truly felt, what they believed, and what their daily lives were truly like. Such information helps to paint a more complete picture, adding texture and depth to the skeletal narratives found in official records. Similarly, analyzing legal records, household accounts, and even works of literature, often written by those who interacted with servants, can provide valuable clues about the social dynamics and daily routines of medieval domestic staff. Moreover, understanding the significance of the servant's position in medieval society requires a deeper consideration of the social structures of the time. Medieval society was highly stratified, with a rigid hierarchy dictating every aspect of life, from who one could marry to what one could eat. The positions that servants held in the system were a clear reflection of that inequality. Servants occupied a precarious position in this hierarchy, positioned between the nobility and the peasantry. While they enjoyed a certain level of security and protection, typically being granted food, shelter, and clothing in exchange for their labor, they were still largely at the mercy of their employers. Their lives were precarious. A single mistake could result in dismissal, leaving them vulnerable to poverty and destitution. The concept of social mobility was largely non existent for most servants. Their opportunities for advancement were severely limited, and the chances of escaping servitude were slim. For many, servitude was a lifelong commitment, passed down through generations. This entrenched system of servitude created a cycle of poverty and dependence, reinforcing existing social inequalities. The lack of social mobility was a key aspect of the systemic oppression that characterized the servant's experience in medieval society. The daily lives of medieval servants were filled with an endless array of tasks, from cleaning and cooking to caring for children and tending livestock. Their responsibilities were vast and often physically demanding. The work was never ending, punctuated by the constant pressure to meet their master's expectations. Mistakes, even minor ones, were often met with harsh punishment, reinforcing the power imbalance inherent in the servant master relationship. This continuous pressure and threat of punishment contributed to a pervasive atmosphere of fear and anxiety within the domestic sphere. The ever present risk of dismissal served to ensure obedience and compliance. However, the story of medieval servants is not solely one of oppression and hardship. The human spirit, even in the face of adversity, is remarkably resilient. Despite the challenges they faced, servants created their own forms of community and support. They formed bonds of friendship and mutual aid, helping each other through difficult times. They developed their own forms of culture and expression, often manifested in songs, stories, and rituals that were passed down through generations. These acts of solidarity were subtle forms of resistance, defying the imposed isolation and creating a sense of shared identity among the servants. Their resilience and ability to find joy and companionship amidst harsh conditions underline their tenacity and strength of spirit. By examining the lives of medieval servants, we gain a much richer, more complete understanding of the past. Their stories challenge the simplistic narratives that have long dominated historical accounts, highlighting the complexity and dynamism of medieval society. The untold stories of those who served offer a vital corrective to our understanding of the period, reminding us of the importance of considering all voices, even those that have long remained silent. Their lives were not merely a backdrop to the larger historical narrative. They were an essential part of the story itself, a testament to the enduring resilience and strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. It is only by acknowledging their presence, their struggles, and their contributions that we can truly appreciate the rich tapestry of medieval life. So, we stand at the precipice, having journeyed through the dimly lit corridors of medieval servitude, encountering the laughter and tears, the triumphs and tragedies, the resilience and the despair of those whose lives sustained the opulent tapestry of the era. We've peered into the cramped quarters, smelled the smoke from the perpetually burning hearths, and felt the chill of winter winds seeping through ill-fitting windows. We've witnessed the relentless toil, the constant vigilance, the ever-present fear of error and its potential consequences. We've followed the paths of individuals whose names were rarely, if ever, recorded, yet whose contributions were undeniable. Their existence, often relegated to the shadows of historical narratives, was far from inconsequential. Their lives were not simply a backdrop to the grand drama of kings and queens, knights and nobles. They were an integral part of that drama, the unseen hands that moved the pieces on the board. Their daily routines, their struggles, their triumphs, all contributed to the complex fabric of medieval society. The grinding poverty, the backbreaking labor, the pervasive inequality. These were not mere inconveniences. They were systemic realities that shaped their world and determined the arc of their lives. Yet, amidst the hardship, we also found glimmers of humanity, of resilience, of the enduring capacity for joy and connection, even in the face of unrelenting adversity. We've seen the subtle acts of rebellion, the quiet moments of solidarity, the shared laughter and whispered stories that bound them together. We've glimpsed the strength of spirit that allowed them to endure, to find solace in companionship, and to maintain their dignity in the face of dehumanizing conditions. The laughter echoing from the kitchens, the shared meals, the comforting rituals, even the sly acts of defiance. These were not merely diversions, they were survival mechanisms, testaments to the indomitable spirit of the human heart. The stories we've encountered, pieced together from fragments of evidence, are more than just historical accounts. They are a reminder of the human cost of social inequality, a cautionary tale against the dangers of overlooking the contributions of the marginalized. They force us to confront the uncomfortable truths about the past, to challenge the romanticized narratives that often obscure the harsh realities of medieval life. The stark contrast between the lives of the nobility and their servants forces us to reconsider the very foundations of power and privilege. Think for a moment about the seemingly mundane tasks: cleaning latrines, hauling water, preparing endless meals. These were not merely chores, they were the building blocks of daily life within the household. Consider the meticulous care required to maintain the intricate fabrics and tapestries that adorned the halls of the wealthy, the tireless effort invested in the preparation of elaborate feasts, the skill involved in tending to the livestock that sustained the household. Each act, however seemingly insignificant, was a testament to the dedication and skill of the servants who performed them. Consider the physical toll exacted by these relentless demands on their bodies, the years of repetitive strain, the constant risk of injury or illness. Their physical strength, their endurance, their capacity for meticulous work, often performed under harsh conditions and without proper tools or support, represent untold human effort. The lack of social mobility, the near impossibility of escaping the cycle of servitude, serves as a potent reminder of the rigid social structures that permeated medieval society. For these individuals, upward mobility was largely a fantasy. The path they trod was often preordained from birth, the legacy of their ancestors, their inheritance. This stark reality stands in sharp contrast to the more fluid social landscapes of contemporary societies, but offers a crucial perspective on the forces that shaped identity and opportunity during the medieval period. This book began with a question, a desire to illuminate the obscured lives of those who served. We sought to unravel the complexities of their existence, to amplify their voices, to restore their dignity and their worth to the historical narrative. In doing so, we have sought to offer not only a historical account, but also a reflection on the enduring human capacity for resilience, for connection, and for hope, even amidst the most challenging circumstances. We've explored the humor, the ingenuity, and the unwavering spirit that allowed them to persevere in their daily lives. We've witnessed the subtle ways in which they created their own worlds, their own communities, their own forms of resistance within the confines of their servitude. Ultimately, the stories of medieval servants are a reminder of the interconnectedness of human experience across time. They serve as a powerful testament to the enduring resilience of the human spirit in the face of oppression and hardship. Their lives, though lived under vastly different conditions than our own, offer valuable insights into the human condition, the challenges they faced, the joys they experienced, the bonds they forged. These are all aspects of the universal human story, the struggles they endured, the quiet acts of defiance, the moments of shared laughter, even the bitterness of unending work, all mirror the spectrum of human emotion. We can relate to their struggles, appreciate their resilience, and reflect on the fundamental similarities in the experiences of humans separated by centuries. What can we learn from their lives? What parallels can we draw between their experiences and our own? How can we ensure that the stories of the marginalized are not lost to the passage of time? These are questions that remain to be considered. What is clear is that by understanding their struggles, we can better understand our own society and strive for a future in which such profound inequalities are eradicated. The echoes of their lives resonate throughout the ages, a powerful reminder that history is not merely a record of kings and conquests, but a tapestry woven from the lives of all who inhabited the past. It is a testament to the resilience, ingenuity, and spirit of the human heart. And in understanding that, we understand something vital not only about the past, but about the present and about our shared future. The past, often seen as a distant and unapproachable entity, becomes accessible and relevant when we encounter the lives of ordinary people. Their stories ground us, remind us that history is not an abstract concept, but a collection of individual experiences. The lives of medieval servants, often relegated to the margins of historical accounts, offer a powerful counterpoint to romanticized visions of the past. They reveal a harsh reality, often marked by inequality and hardship, yet simultaneously showcasing extraordinary human resilience, fortitude, and even moments of joy and camaraderie. In examining their lives, we discover the enduring power of the human spirit, the capacity to find hope and connection even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Their stories are not simply about the past. They are a reflection of the human condition and speak to our shared humanity across time. Their struggles are a reminder of the ongoing fight for social justice and equality. Their legacy calls us to action, urging us to be mindful of those who are marginalized and to strive for a world where everyone has the opportunity to live a life of dignity and fulfillment. The quiet dignity of those whose lives supported the grandeur of the era should be remembered not only with respect, but with a commitment to ensuring that the narratives of the disenfranchised are never again lost to history. The echoes of their lives should compel us to seek a deeper understanding of our collective history, not to merely admire the grandeur of the past, but to learn from its mistakes and to strive toward a more just and equitable future. The story of medieval servants, therefore, is not merely a historical account. It is a moral imperative, a call to remember, to understand, and to strive for a better world.